To kickstart this day, we are excited to introduce to you three ladies with a drive for change, means to achieve it, and with the skills to really make it happen. Fran Farren is founder and director of Indigo Trust. She's also a former advisor to the UK Prime Minister's Strategy Unit. Kristina Ljungberg is co-founder of The Case of Her and Influence Film. She has a strong record and background in biotech industry. And we will listen to a conversation about this drive for change and their journeys as philanthropists. Leading this conversation is Joe Enser, Global Director of Philanthropy Network and trustee of the UBS Optimus Foundation. Welcome, Joe, Fran, Kristina. The stage is yours.
Good morning, Stockholm. It's great to be here, particularly so because I am sitting alongside two extraordinary, young, still, female, impactful philanthropists. I know you both very well, and I would say that you are at the top of your game in terms of the impact that you are achieving in your areas of chosen philanthropic focus. You're extraordinary, you're impactful, but it hasn't always been like this, has it? You've been on a journey to get here. And I would like to ask you to share with the audience why or how you decided to become a philanthropist, and what are the lessons that you can share about getting started. Fran.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you for inviting us to be here. I've been on a bit of a journey with my own philanthropy. I was deeply privileged when I turned 18 to inherit wealth. And to me, that meant the huge privilege and responsibility of doing as much good with it as I possibly could. But I don't know about you. When I was 18, I didn't know anything about life, what I was going to study at university, let alone what it meant to be a strategic donor. My family background is that my father is David Sainsbury, who's one of the giving pledgers. He became the first British person to give away £1 billion in his own lifetime. So we had a very strong culture and values around giving and philanthropy. But that didn't mean that there was any guidebook, any manual on how to do it. And my family wanted me to let me find my own way, which was wonderful. But they left me to my own devices. And I set up my own foundation when I was 18. And then I stumbled around because I didn't know, how do you do this? How do you do this well? What does it mean? And certainly in the UK, there hasn't been a lot of open discussion and debate about the profession of philanthropy. What is it? Is it a job? Is it a hobby? What are we doing it for? So I found that very stressful. I was constantly agonized that anybody else would be doing a better job with the money than I was. In the meantime, I was going off to university, I was a student, and then I was starting my professional career as a civil servant, a government advisor on public policy. And in my day job, I was taught how to do it. I was sent on training, there was professional development. And it suddenly occurred to me, why am I not being taught how to be a philanthropist? So in my 20s, I said, right, I'm stopping making grants. And I'd been making a lot of grants until then. I'm going to stop doing this until I can work out how to do it properly. And I'm probably one of the few people who then Googled how to be a philanthropist.
Not the only one.
And was very lucky at that time to come across something called the Philanthropy Workshop, which is exactly that, helping people become more strategic and effective donors. And I went on the course immediately. It's like a mini MBA in how to be a strategic donor. And it changed my philanthropy completely. It took me back to first principles and allowed me to find my own strategy and my confidence in how to approach it. And perhaps most importantly, an incredible peer network of other donors going through the same journey. We could ask ourselves the embarrassing questions that we didn't want to admit. I remember being on an international trip, walking along the Great Wall of China and asking one of the other people on the trip, on what date do you tell your boyfriend that you have your own foundation? When is that socially acceptable? I'd never had anywhere I could ask those questions. And my real takeaway from doing the course was you have to find your passion. We're going to be talking about sustainable development goals today, and you can't rank them in importance. You can't say it is more moral to focus on ending poverty or gender equality or healthcare or clean water. These are all important issues. There are enough problems for all of us to spend our lives working on. So how do you pick your topic? And for me, it had to be something I felt personally passionate about, but also that I knew something about. I can't tell you the difference between a really good malaria project and a really bad one, but I'm a geek. I'm a tech nerd, and I love technology. And that was my focus in government policy. So I decided this is where my giving should be focused. And that opened up the world for me, because I know what I'm talking about in that space. I can add more than just signing the check. And ever since then, I've been able to get involved in my philanthropy at a much deeper, more strategic level.
Thank you, Fran. And Christina, why did you decide to become philanthropic?
Well, you've asked us why and how, and I just have to be honest, the why is really easy and the how has been really complex. So we'll get more to that later. But for me, the why, I think it's a question that many of us have faced, and that was, I just wanted to live a life that mattered more than the one that I was living. And around the time that I was having those thoughts, Bill Gates happened to give a commencement speech at Harvard and really made a call to action that spoke to me. And he asked a couple questions. He said, should our best minds be dedicated to our biggest problems? And should the world's most privileged people learn about the lives of the world's least privileged? Don't let complexity stop you. Be activists. Take on big inequities. It will be one of the greatest experiences of your life. And I have to say, he was absolutely right. Since 2010, since I've been engaging in my philanthropic journey, it's been so hard. It's been harder than ever, and I'm working more than ever, and it's my pleasure. It's given my life so much meaning. And I would have to say I'm still surprised that more of us haven't woken up in Sweden and understood what a pleasure it is to engage in the world's most complex issues. And we're not talking about money, we're talking about dedicating our time and our minds and engaging in these questions. So my story is quite simple. I worked in the biotech industry, ended up moving to Sweden for love, started working at a prestigious consulting firm, and hit one of those pivot points like we do in our middle age, and asked myself, who am I working for? What am I working for, and does it matter? And that started my journey, and decided that what I wanted out of my life was to be an expert at something and to be in it for the long game. So starting a foundation together with my husband in our 30s meant that we could really engage in an issue for 30 or 40 years. What a pleasure. So in 2010, neither of us came from a family that had any history of giving whatsoever. And I really view my moving to Sweden as being a turning point, kind of in the way that I was thinking, really learned what it meant to treat people equally, and that all of us are equal. And a lot of that has just come out so much in living here. So just a shout out to Sweden, thank you. I started by sitting in an office looking at a wall for many months and really asking some of the same questions that you were, Fran, wondering, how are you supposed to do this? And I did three things. One of the first things was I read a book called The Blue Sweater, written by Jacqueline Novogratz from Acumen, and she mentioned this program called TPW, which you've mentioned, so I don't need to say too much, but to spend a year really digging into the tools in my toolbox and kind of how to be strategic in philanthropy was a game changer for me. The second thing that I did was that I got out of the office. I got the list of the Nit Konto organizations here in Sweden, the nonprofit organizations, and I just chose 30. And I went out into our neighborhoods here and I just started asking all 30 of those NGOs the same question. What are the biggest challenges facing this world and which ones are ripe for change? And I have to tell you, much to my surprise, out of those meetings, about 3 individuals could even imagine having that conversation with me. And I just started talking to them for engaging and really discussing these issues and using them as partners. The third thing that I did was probably in learning from TPW, learning how other people have typically attacked philanthropy. There's a model that's sometimes referred to as spray and pray. You can spray a little money around and pray that something good happens. And we decided to go the other route and to choose one organization that we were 90% sure that they were world leaders and doing amazing work, and to bet big and to leverage that to network and to learn. And that really was the beginning of my journey. And the theme for me was really fail forward, fail fast, and learn.
Thank you. You're both very good examples of how you combine your resource, your talents, and your passion. And at TPW, we say that if you can manage to do those 3 things really well, you can be very effective because you're really motivated to get out of bed every morning and start practicing your philanthropy. And Christina, you speak very, very passionately about your philanthropic focus. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and specifically how you work to achieve change?
So I have 2 things that I'm very passionate about and 2 focuses in my philanthropy. One is documentary film and storytelling, which I'm not going to spend too much time speaking about today. And the other one is menstruation. And I think, menstruation and periods, and how it's shocking how taboo that still is today. Probably half the audience sort of went, oh, menstruation. Does somebody really focus on menstruation in their philanthropy? Well, not many. So that's why I'm there. Today, more people are menstruating than ever with good nutrition and having less children, and sort of the health of the planet means that women have 2 to 4 times more periods in their lifetime. And kind of at this moment, there are about 800 million of us menstruating. So it's a wide issue, challenge, opportunity for women. And I don't have to tell anyone in the room, again, not only is it taboo, but it's highly stigmatized. And just the lack of awareness and education and body literacy around periods, lack of access to products or materials to manage your period, lack of a safe place to take care of it, and many girls don't even know what it is before they get it. So we're here today really focusing on the SDGs, and I would have to say menstruation kind of falls into about all of them, including mostly gender equality, number 5, number 3, good health and well-being, number 4, quality education, and number 6, water and sanitation. And I think the fact that menstrual health falls into so many of them really tells us a lot why it's difficult to work in this area, because it's so siloed. There are a lot of different interventions and programs that are being run around menstrual health, but there's not really anyone that's taking a holistic approach. So what we're doing in our foundation and funding collective, The Case for Her, is we're taking a portfolio approach. And I would say it's actually, mostly because there aren't too many others of us, but it's the most innovative, impactful, interesting, holistic menstrual health portfolio in the world. And we have about 15 projects and investments all around menstrual health, including investing in a handful of social enterprises to working in education, research, distribution. And it's been a learning tool for me over the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
Thank you. Fran, same question.
As I mentioned before, it took me a while to find my focus, but I've narrowed down over time, so I've got a really clear idea of what I'm doing. And we call it transparency and accountability, but in the SDG framework, it's under SDG 16, around building effective and accountable institutions. We particularly look at 16.6, which is about the institutions, and a 16.10, which is about public access to information. Now, this may sound incredibly dull. I think there's a reason it's low down on the list of the goals, and it certainly doesn't sound as sexy as ending poverty or anything. But the reason I ended up with that is seeing how many development projects fail because of a lack of effective institutions. I fund in sub-Saharan Africa, and corruption is not unique to developing countries. We know that it's all around the world. We have it in the UK and the US. Corruption is a problem. But in many of the countries where we work, it is crippling attempts to drive change. And so we look at particularly digital technologies as a means to empower citizens to hold their governments to account, to hold their politicians to account. We worked with a great project in Nigeria where a huge amount of public funds coming in from oil revenues had been promised to various health projects, and of course never got anywhere near the people on the ground who needed them. But citizen activists were doing open budget work. Look, here's the budget, here's what you promised would be spent. Traditional grassroots activism going door to door with data visualization saying, this money's supposed to have been spent on a new hospital. Was it ever built? No. And then turning that into a social media campaign which amplified their voices back to politicians and to journalism until eventually the money really appeared in those communities. And a lot of it was used to treat children suffering from lead poisoning from local mining. So if you want to think about health, you need to think about the government, the public services that are going to be delivering those health services. If you want to think about agriculture, you have to think about non-corrupt markets where farmers can sell their crops. And in today's digital world, there are suddenly new ways of empowering citizens to do this themselves. Obviously, you have to have a role for investigative journalists, for human rights organizations, but you can put tools in the hands of citizens themselves if they have the information that they need. And we take a lot of this for granted in the UK or in Sweden, that I know who my elected representative is. I know what their voting record is. I know their expenses. I can look this up, and any journalist can. That is a very rare privilege. But without that information, it's really hard to drive change. So we do a lot of work with parliamentary monitoring organisations and simply the record of voting. If you don't have that, you can't drive change. Now, that on its own is not sufficient. You still have to have a functioning civil society and lots of other mechanisms. But try doing that activism without that information. So we look at high-risk startup NGOs using digital to drive social change through transparency and accountability. And like Christina, it's wonderful to be in a space that's quite small. There aren't that many other donors who have that particular focus. But it gives you a chance to become an expert and to work really in collaboration with others in the same space.
You're both so expert in your chosen areas of philanthropic focus. It's incredibly impressive. I want to make the assumption that you weren't experts when you started. And so can you talk a little bit more about how you've become as effective as you can be in this space? What are the things that you've done, or the tools or techniques that you've used as philanthropists to become really effective? Fran?
I certainly wasn't an expert when I started. I knew a lot about technology policy in the UK context and some of the civic activism work there. But I was really asking myself the question about how powerful could this be in developing countries. So having done the workshop, I thought, right, I need to learn by doing. So I started out with a portfolio of saying, I make lots of very small grants, and many of them will fail, and that's okay, so long as I've learned something from each failure, and we haven't actively caused harm. But to always be learning, asking myself, why did this work? Why did this fail? What could we have done better? To be very open and humble in the process, so that we were learning from the grantees as much as from academics. And to have a continued professional development for myself. Not to say, I've done this workshop, now I know everything, job done. How am I going to learn throughout my career as a philanthropist? So I make time every year to go on learning journeys or conferences or workshops with TPW, to come to conferences like this, because it challenges my thinking. I come across new ideas. Or the best thing is when people ask really difficult questions that I've never considered before, and my learning develops even more. The biggest thing for me was to just be open. And I was terrified of this at first. I thought, if I'm public about being a philanthropist, I'm setting myself up as a target for the press. And the press is not always friendly about philanthropists, certainly not in the UK. But it was the only way I could learn what other people were doing. When I was 18, I didn't have the people I could ask questions. I wanted to know, how do you do it? How did you make those decisions? So, well, if I put myself forward, if I'm willing to be transparent, maybe other people will be as well. And in the end, that led me to set up a campaign called 360 Giving, which I've been running in the UK for the past couple of years, encouraging philanthropists to be transparent by just publishing online in a shared standard where they give money. The most basic information I gave this many 100,000 to this charity to do this in this location. I mean, this is not rocket science, but it is incredibly hard. And if you've ever been a fundraiser for a charity, you know how hard it is to find who's doing what. But if we do that, it allows us to learn from each other. I can pick up the phone and go, I see you funded them. How did it go? What was it like? It allows charities to find me so I get a better quality of application. And we hope that it raises the level of debate about what we're all doing, allows us to evaluate what we're doing. So becoming an advocate for better philanthropy has actually been one of the most impactful things for me.
And you're becoming a very wonderful role model in this space, Fran, for other people that are coming through aged 18 and not sure how to go forward. So thank you. Christina, same to you. How are you the most effective you can be in the area of menstrual health?
Well, I think I have some similar experiences to Fran in that there's so much power in coming to this space and saying, I don't have the answers. And I think it's especially important in this work to not have the answers because we're not trying to solve our own problems. So some of my advice or learnings have been, find your peers. One of the most powerful things for me is that two of the foundations that are sitting in this room today, Swedish foundations, really have counseled me, and we did some co-funding together, and they were a few years further down the pipe than I was. And they were just open and honest and supportive, and that made all the difference for me. The second thing, it took some time and it was a bit tough, but I found a partner. I found a philanthropic partner, co-funder here in Stockholm. And when you're a small philanthropist starting out, and I mean, I'll be a small philanthropist my whole life, if you can find a like-minded individual that has similar passions that are aligned to yours, and you can basically double your funding and double your brain power, then you're kind of off and running. So I'm so thankful for my co-funder here in Stockholm. And then you find out, where are the smart people working on the issues that you're interested in, and you go there and you just get super curious. So I've joined, for instance, a collective called the Maverick Collective, and it's basically a group of badass women philanthropists that just get down and dirty and solve the issues and ask the tough questions. So just modeling after them, such inspiration. And hanging out, joining a few networks, for instance, like the Tonic Network for Impact Investors. Of course, TPW, to be part of a network of 400 global philanthropists has been game changer for me. And then going to events where smart people that do the work that you're interested in hang out, like Skull World Forum, I would say. But that being said, similar to something that you mentioned, my husband and I, we have committed to doing a learning journey at least once every 2 years. So to share in that kind of experience and go and firsthand experience the challenges has also made the difference. To own those stories and to be so moved and to have that kind of energy that just feeds into what you're doing, to sort of like recommit regularly and remind yourself why you're doing the work, has been wonderful.
There's great power in proximity, I think. Proximity to the issue that you're trying to resolve, proximity to peer philanthropists that are coming up with the same issues that you face. And so thank you for that. I moving slightly away from your focus, philanthropic focus, I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about how you can maximize the impact of your philanthropic capital outside of grant making. Give a range of different ideas on that. Christina, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, first of all, if it hasn't come through, my sort of sweet spot is if it's high risk and it's underfunded and there aren't other funders and it's taboo. That's kind of where I'm at. So, we're starting with a portfolio of menstruation, but quite soon, actually this year, we're launching another portfolio on something even more taboo, menopause, and then another one even more taboo, which is female sexual pleasure. But I like using new approaches. So for instance, one specific example would be using user-centered design to really understand the menstrual health space. So for instance, we have a project in Nepal where for the first time, we're really digging deep and understanding Sarah's challenges, Sarah being the girl who menstruates in Nepal, and engaging her in co-creating the solutions, really getting humble, really getting curious, and creating space for the people in the community to actually co-create those solutions. And I have to say, there aren't that many people that will fund that because it's kind of terrifying. Funding something where you say, people ask, so what do you think the outcomes are going to be? I have no idea. I'm not working on the problem. Sarah is. She hasn't told me the solution yet. So another example would be using technology and data. Mm-hmm. We're digging into using lean data, which could be used by a social enterprise to really connect with customers, or it could be used by an NGO to sort of understand the recipient's experience. And as a small foundation, we thought, well, we can't encourage everyone in our portfolio, the companies, the NGOs, to use lean data if we don't really know how to use it. So we actually did a really quick, lean, kind of dirty, short-term, fast study in East Africa where we partnered with different social enterprises and implementing partners and a technology company called Echo Mobile. And it's one of the most difficult things that we've ever done, but I'll tell you what, I know a lot about lean data now in the space. And then I would say another challenge for us, but also opportunity, has been in measuring impact. I think everyone in the room has probably spent a lot of late nights thinking about how can I measure and communicate my impact. Well, in the menstrual space, there aren't metrics and indicators. There's a lot of talk about keeping girls in school, but if it gets down to really measuring and communicating, there aren't. So we're starting to make investments in things like research in the space to drive some consensus and then develop metrics that the space will actually adopt. And I think that's gonna be a game changer for us.
Thank you. Fran.
I share Christina's excitement about the niche, the difficult, the taboo areas. I'm filled with admiration for how she does it. I think the thing I learned early on was that unless you're Bill Gates, which most of us aren't, there are very few world problems that you can solve yourself. So whatever you do, you're going to have to work with other donors. And so I try to maximize my impact by finding my place in that funding ecosystem. And for us, we felt comfortable with being at the early stage, high risk investment end of it, but working out where we could graduate our projects onto. So we're often the first donor to an organization. They've been hand to mouth since then. They've been getting little grants, but we're their first core donor. And we know that if we can stick with them through just a year or two, support them, allow them to grow, allow them to develop their evidence base, we have a great track record of them graduating them on to much bigger donors. We do a lot of work with the Amidian Network, with Open Society Foundation, who are funding at 10 times our level. But they can't do the very early stage projects because the really early stage ones have no track record. They don't have 5 years audited accounts. They don't have the evidence base. And governments can't fund those organizations because it would be an inappropriate use of taxpayers' money if there's no evidence that it works. But if we can take them through 2 years, then they're just edging up into that respectability, that proven work, and then they can fly with major funds from bigger donors. So we found our place in that system, and then we work to build relationships with the other donors. And now we have a lovely virtuous cycle where we send people, we recommend them onto these bigger donors. But the donors also come to us and say, we've spotted these really talented people over here. They're not ready for us. Can you take them through that early stage? And that's kind of the added value we try to bring to our projects. And then I talked about this a little before, but becoming an advocate for your cause is a huge way to maximize impact. It's scary, and we've talked about this a lot.
Just a little.
Particularly when you don't necessarily feel that you're an expert or you're not used to being the public face of something. It feels really scary. But we have this privileged position where we can be invited to conferences. We can be asked to talk about these things. So there's a responsibility to put ourselves forward and do that. And I'm trying to do that far more now in terms of actually looking critically about the practice of philanthropy itself. We're all trying to solve problems in the world. Are we trying to fix philanthropy? The things that are wrong with it, the things that aren't perfect, are we keeping it up to date? You know, much of philanthropy looks pretty much the same as when Andrew Carnegie was talking about it in the 19th century. It's not modernized at the same pace the rest of the world has. But there are great innovations and ideas out there. So how can we be critical of ourselves and constantly be updating and learning? And that's why I became so obsessed about 360 giving. You know, you wouldn't do market investments with no FTSE 100, no Reuters, no market information at all. But we do philanthropy with no clue what's going on, what other people are doing, what the impact is, what the success is. And then we're surprised when it doesn't all work perfectly. So let's break down some of those barriers and actually be willing to put our hands up and say, this is what I did, this is what worked, this is what didn't, and let other people judge the value of it for itself.
Thank you. One more question from me, and then I'll open it up to the audience. How important do you both think it is that you do no harm with your wealth creation or where you've invested your capital? Is that something that you look at as philanthropists as well?
Yes. I mean, I look at risk particularly in our portfolio. And while I've mentioned being high risk, for me, that's about risk of failure. I know that some of the projects won't work, but I have zero tolerance for risk to the activists themselves. So, first of all, doing no harm to the projects we support. I don't ever want someone to be put in an unsafe position. And if you're fighting corruption in some of the countries we work in, that's high risk. So we need to make sure that the ideas come from them, they're not driven by us, and do no harm through that. Separately, with the investments that support the projects, we have ethical investing policies. I have very clear restrictions on asset classes that we don't touch. I'm looking to get more involved in the impact investing space, although it's one area where I find anti-corruption and human rights fits less well, because if you're making money off human rights work, you're probably in a slightly dodgy area. So that's been an interesting one to navigate, but it's a hugely exciting time to be involved in that.
It's absolutely something that I think about, and I think there are a lot of examples around us where we can see how it wasn't done appropriately in the past. So that's given me a lot of opportunity for contemplation across the kind of work that we're doing. And I think just mentioning the work that we're doing in Nepal through engaging those that are affected actually in the work that we're doing has just become more and more important and core to everything that we do and the questions that we ask. But I mean, I think it's something that you have to revisit constantly, because we all work within sort of our own experiences. And again, sort of this power of proximity, actually putting yourself and really making yourself open to understanding the context. And then again, asking the question, what are we doing here and why are we doing it? And what's the impact?
Thank you. Linda, will you like to give us some questions, or shall I ask the audience?
We have a couple of questions on the screen. I think we should have. On the Mentimeter screen. Here we go.
They're over here. I think I need glasses.
Okay, I can read
No,
it.
it's okay. What's your priority for the near future? So, what next?
That's a surprisingly tough question. For me, my priority at the moment is learning more about how to help the projects we support in capacity building. So we spend a lot of time talking to them about their theory of change, their mission statement, how they're going to make change happen. And sometimes we can neglect the capacity they have as an organization to deliver it. So we work with people who are genius at civic technology, coding programs or mobile applications that will open up human rights. But that doesn't mean that they've got accountancy skills. And actually, that may be the single biggest thing holding them back, that they're so invested in their work, their back office is a mess. And that is something where a lot of donors just want to fund the project, but actually you need to support the health of the organization. So my priority is talking to all our grantees, seeing what they need beyond the project costs. Is it they need someone to pay for an accountant so they can get audited accounts, which is often a step to getting bigger funds in? Is it marketing? No one ever wants to put marketing budget in an application to a foundation. But if you're doing any kind of public information program, whether it's spreading a health message or challenging corruption, you need people to hear about your work. You need people to hear about the services that you're offering. And a marketing budget can open up change. So what do our grantees really need, and how can we help them build that capacity? So we're trying to learn more about that.
You've said a little bit about what next, but do you want to elaborate?
So at this point, I would say we're a bit at an inflection point. We've been developing this amazing learning portfolio for the last few years, but we're really asking ourselves, what next? And I think part of that is really adding value across the portfolio and starting to fund the tough stuff. So for instance, convenings, relationship building, the parts where it's more difficult to actually measure the outcomes, but that it's so important, investing in people and leaders. And to your point about organizations, really going there and saying, this organization needs some core funding, they need some unrestricted funding, maybe I should try not to be like all the other funders and just build a relationship of trust and openness and transparency, and start funding unrestricted. So we're doing that. But also, what's next? I would say scale. How are we going to reach scale, this small little Swedish foundation? And so we're investing in learning more and getting smarter about advocacy. We're working with partners to develop a global advocacy strategy for menstrual health. I'm excited about that.
And what would you hope to achieve with that? What would you like to achieve with that global advocacy campaign?
Exactly. Well, I would say the first things first. We're going to build the case first. But what we really want to do is have the case that we can recruit additional funding and influencers, people that will leverage their voices for change. So again, scale through funding and voices.
Thank you. Did you want to say something else, Fran?
Actually, it's covered a little bit by the next question.
Shall I read out the next question? Do you partner with other foundations or trusts? If so, for what reason? And if not, why not? Partnership.
This actually helps me answer another priority that I have. I've talked a little bit about partnering with other foundations when we're graduating projects on, but a huge priority for me in the UK at the moment is this greater drive for transparency. So I'm spending a lot of time partnering with other UK foundations to say, let's be transparent. So we set ourselves a moonshot goal for 360 Giving, which was to capture at least 80% of UK grant funding in this open data format. If you want to learn more about it, look at 360giving.com. And I didn't really think this was possible. I knew there were a lot of blockages to people being open with their grants data, and people not really understanding what open data is and why it matters. So I've been thrilled over the last 2 years now to have got over 70 foundations in the UK publishing their data, capturing over £7 billion worth of grants through this format. And that sounds a bit nerdy and a bit Excel spreadsheet, but it actually means you can go to a tool called GrantNav and look up who's funding what. And this was never possible before. It's ridiculous in a Google age that you can't look up what people are giving to. So that means for me constant partnering with other foundations, taking them on a journey of what it means to be in a modern digital world and why we shouldn't be afraid to just be transparent about what we're doing.
So I would say absolutely it's essential, but it doesn't come without challenges. I think one of the things that I love about the way that we've set up our foundation here in Sweden is that we're lean, we're mean, we're flexible, we're nimble, we move fast. And not many foundations do that. So when it comes to partnering with other foundations, it can be quite frustrating to hear, well, our grant cycle isn't for another 11 months or so on and so forth. But I'm just going to keep at it. Those relationships and supporting one another are important. And when it comes to scale, it's going to be essential. So I would just encourage foundations to be more fast and flexible. And yeah.
There's certainly a lot of talk in the space of the need for organisations to work more collectively together in order to have more impact, because there's so many different silos of people reinventing the wheel, not learning from best practice and not being able to get to scale and replicate. So I think it's great when you have examples like you two of where you are actively working in partnership. Linda, I think we have time for one more question.
One more.
If you'd like to put it on the
There's a
screen.
question
Oh,
from
there,
Matt.
someone,
Yeah.
a real person.
So I have a related question, but first of all, I would like to make a comment. So my name is Zero Akyol, and I work at the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA. So first of all, I would like to make a comment about Larry's introductory remarks. I think that one thing that we need to keep in mind is that the size of Swedish aid is almost just as large as the defense industry. So we're talking about almost 50 billion. So this is both a blessing and a curse, and I think that this is part of the problem that the philanthropy sector is lagging behind. At SIDA, we are making huge progress in terms of collaborating with the philanthropic sector, and we have novel and commendable collaborations with the Gates Foundation, with Omdiar, the Open Society Foundation, but also with private sector corporations. So that's just a comment. And my question to the two speakers, to Christina and Fran, is that so about the last question that was asked, are you interested, and to what extent are you working with government entities like the equivalents of SIDA? And the reason I'm asking this question is because the two areas that you are focusing on, so menstrual hygiene management and the entire area of sexual reproductive health and rights, is extremely important to Sweden, and we have a massive support, for example, to the Global Sanitation Fund. So I know that my colleagues who work especially on water and sanitation, but also the health sector, would be very interested in knowing which organizations you're supporting and what are the lessons learned from that collaboration. And also to you, Fran, the entire area of corruption is also very sensitive, and there's, we know that in our sector there's a lot of vested interest, and it's extremely sensitive. And so I'm actually responsible for the global portfolio on anti-corruption at SIDA, and also there, what organizations are you supporting? And I think it would be very useful for us to understand how you're working, which you're supporting, and again, in terms of lessons learned and some of the challenges that you have experienced. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So guys, you have 1 minute each
Yes,
to answer
no
that
problem.
question.
I'm
Christina.
so happy that Sita's in the room. Huge fan. And I would have to say that I feel that more and more I've been developing my relationship with SIDA. So for instance, one of the things that needs more funding is relationship building and convenings. So just a few weeks ago, my colleagues and I hosted a summit here in Sweden called Scaling Impact in East Africa for Menstrual Health. And we had a participant from SIDA with us for 4 days. It was amazing. So thank you. We also yesterday took Acumen to SIDA, who spoke to about 15, 20 people at there. And I think everyone's feeling was the openness, the willingness, the curiosity, the interest in engaging was fantastic. So absolutely, yes, you can't do this work without international development agencies, especially when it comes to scale. So thank you, SIDA.
I'd echo that, in that SIDA has a world-class reputation as one of the better development agencies. We certainly try and work with government. I work with DFID in the UK. In some of the countries we work in, the governments are not always aligned with an anti-corruption approach, so you have to partner with them quite carefully. What I think is impressive about CEDA here is some of the leadership you've shown in IATI, the International Aid Transparency Initiative, which was an effort to get donor governments being transparent about what they fund. And that's grown across the world. There's a great NGO called Publish What You Fund that helps open up this information. I'd encourage agencies like CEDA to work with philanthropists in your own countries to marry up that approach on transparency. So you want to know what philanthropists might be funding, what are the projects we fund and why. Help us have a platform to show that. Encourage philanthropists in this country to share an open data standard. And we try and live our values. So my trust is called the Indigo Trust. Every single grant we make, big or small, is published on our blog. We write about it. It's published both to IATI and to 360 Giving. So you can look at it, you can see any project, you can follow up with it, and we'll be there to talk about it. So I think government has a huge ability to model the change it wants to see in philanthropy and create that knowledge sharing between government and philanthropists.
Thank you, Fran. I want to thank you both for coming and speaking so openly about your philanthropy, and very quickly to summarize for those of you in the room that are thinking about becoming more philanthropic, don't be nervous to start and to splash around in the shallows. It's something your father says when he got going, just splash around in the shallows, get going, start practicing, and it's okay to fail. And actually you learn more from your failures often than you do from your successes. Do no harm, become expert. You are both such fantastic examples of people that have become really expert in your space and are therefore having so much impact, but also be passionate and have fun. And you do that too. So thank you very much. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you so much.